Nations Bank, the power to make a difference.
Railway car 31599G. 50 years ago, boxcars like this were a conveyance for freight and cattle, and Jews. Constantly, they ran from Warsaw to the Treblinka death camp, 100 passengers at a time, one way. Washington, D.C., the winter of 1991, and 31599G makes its last trip to the U.S. Holocaust Museum being built round it. A voyage into the permanence of history itself, its freight this time a flood of remembrance.
We were told to march out and to get onto a cattle train. And we were in that group about 13 people, 13, 15, or in that range. And we got on the train. My father said that today is my bar mitzvah. And he had secretly hidden, risking his life, a little bottle of wine. And he took it out and he passed it around to everybody, and everyone had a little sip and had a toast, and that's how I celebrated my bar mitzvah. It was very sad. But there was no time to think then of this, the time that was survival.
Survival, in the deepest sense, that's what museums and history are about. To give us the past so we can make sense of the present. But a museum dedicated to the Holocaust, the mass murder of 11 million men, women, children, infants, is difficult. As a species, we turn away from it in horror. Which makes this history as remote as Neanderthal man. Its artifacts obliterated, lost, hidden in anger and in shame. It's history that hurts. This is the story of a museum that had to be made for the living. The idea of the museum came from the Carter administration. Jimmy Carter, the human rights president, created a commission that envisioned a living memorial to the Holocaust, which President Carter called the most unspeakable crime in the whole of human history. In a 1979 Rose Garden speech, Nobel Prize winner Elie Wiesel presented the commission's final report. The museum would be established by Congress. The government would donate land on the mall in Washington. The building would depend on private donations. But the essence of the museum would be the experience of the survivors, the victims.
Ancient dynasties whose lineage was traced back to King David and Moses was swept away with the winds of ashes. In the course of our study, Mr. President, we tried to capture some of their silent outcries. We asked them for guidance.
How do you tell the story of the Holocaust in a museum and make it believable? The more facts you amass, the more sane the arguments, the more preposterous it all seems. It was only when the museum's designers visited the original killing fields, the death zones in Germany and Poland, that they had their answer. Ralph Applebaum, a respected exhibit designer, was teamed with Martin Smith, a documentary filmmaker, to conceptualize a museum that was at first expected to depend on pictures, papers, film, showcases. But the tangible, the physical, has a way of breaking through, helps the mind understand the heart's pain. To discover how to narrate, how to retell the story, the team came first to Auschwitz-Birkenau.
This is the life or death spot. In fact, coming here at all, you were facing death. But whether it would be that moment, whether you would be worked to death, or whether you would simply be exterminated, this was where the decision was made.
This is the terminal where the trains ran on time, where Sophie's choice was not a fiction, where infants, siblings, grandparents were sacrificed so others might live, if only for a matter of weeks. No choice at all. Reality in the camps instantly changed Martin and Ralph. Plainly, paper and data would not do. To reach the visitor's mind, exhibits would have to have the same sensual effect as a walkthrough here.
I think the importance about the first trip that Ralph and I took here was that once we'd seen these places and had actually touched some of this, we were absolutely convinced that it couldn't be just a two-dimensional museum, that it had to actually be something physical.
Only objects, preferably large objects, would provide reliable context for the interpretive story. For Ralph and Martin, the task would be complete only when they had internalized all the images and artifacts into something that spoke to heart as well as head.
When we came back, the initial planning was to put the visitors to the museum on a journey from the normal, from the stable, from the reasonable, floor by floor, gallery by gallery, into something completely unreasonable. It seems that if you keep moving, you almost don't have time to think. I almost imagine that must have been what it's like to be rushed out of your home, take your kids, take enough food to kind of survive, and never stop. Never have a chance to stop, never have a chance to think. And then end up here.
Among the remnants of the death camps, one thing was clear, that the very fabric of the site was in danger of disappearing.
The evidence is disintegrating. It really is, the evidence is disappearing, not just the wooden barracks that are gone there. Everything is rotting away somehow or other. These things have to be seized. That goes for the memories of the survivors who are dying, and it actually is for the physical fabric, and we have to try and pass on some of that physical reality somehow or other.
Photographers who...
For Ralph and Martin, it took only a single visceral visit. Reality in their museum would be anchored by palpable evidence. While the designers were piecing together their view of the museum, construction was underway for the space their displays would appear in. The museum selected architect James Freed of the New York firm of I.M. Pei, renowned for its starkly modern buildings and a new generation of museums. But this would be different. Rather than just confirm what visitors had come to expect from the architecture of a stable, classical, sane world, this had to introduce them to another sort of universe. Fried struggled with the design. To solve it, he had to delve into his past, his youth in Germany. Today, Fried suffers from Parkinson's disease.
My father took me one day to a park and he said, "Look, you cannot go in here anymore." "Why?" They said, "No Jews allowed." I said, "We're not Jews, are we?" He said, "Yes, we are."
The future architect would get a boost on the infamous evening of Kristallnacht, November 9th, 1938. Open season on Jews and Jewish property. Government-sanctioned, legalized thuggery. Fried and his father avoided the SS by riding the streetcars all night. Suddenly, as the car approached the rubble of the synagogue, his father jumped off and snatched up a single mosaic tile for his young son. "Keep this," he whispered. "You must remember this." Eventually, his family escaped to America, and it was here that his interest in his Jewish past stopped.
Turns out that I had about half my family wiped out by it. But we never talked about it because when my mother received that letter in the United States, it told her that her parents were gone, her brothers and sisters wiped out, she just screamed and fell to the floor. That was that. No, I immediately closed up. It's like a shutter, just closed.
The topic stayed closed until he began work on the museum. Eventually, however, he knew that he too, like everyone studying the Holocaust, had to make the pilgrimage to Auschwitz. He arrived there on All Hallows' Eve, in time to witness the guttering of memorial flames in the old ovens, a pale reflection of the firestorm that once was here. For Fried, this place melted the frozen seas of his memory and creativity. The design was set. The materials would reflect the look of the camps, and a trip through here would be a way of experiencing the Holocaust in its deepest sense, exposing the bones beneath the skin. Little glimpses of reality, uncertainty, like the Auschwitz gates. Arbeit macht frei. Work shall make you free. Nothing's what it seems. A sense of constriction, of the walls closing in. Isolation. The museum's bridges suggesting those in the ghetto, protecting the masses from the Jewish infection. And the glass footing extending precariously out over the abyss. From the museum, you can see all the monuments to the great figures of our past, the pantheon of American history and architecture. Why the Holocaust here? As Fried says, if you trust society, you never have to think about evil, about the unthinkable. The force of Fried's design, especially in this context, means that we must come to grips with it, neglect it at our peril. It's not a story that deserves a pretty building. Every bit of the design is freighted with meaning. The twisted steel over the atrium hints at the steel reinforcing bands of the crematoria. The bricks, the blood red of the barracks. The shallow arches, ordinarily a commonplace of Central Europe, here a haunting remembrance. Architecture as memory. Consistently overall, the sky. After the Nazis had taken everything else, the only thing left was sky. The next stage was to find artifacts. That task fell to a special class of historian curators. One of them was Jacek Nowakowski. He traveled the length and breadth of Poland, searching out evidence, people, places, things. Jacek's first stop, a dark wood 20 miles outside Warsaw. The Palmieri Forest, the site of the slaughter of the Polish Catholic intelligentsia. Thousands of them were murdered in forests like this.
If you are looking for an artifact from an execution, that's either what do you have? You have a firing squad and a victim. So what kind of artifact you can find? So I thought that maybe some of the stray bullets went into a tree in the forest, and then I will be able to find something like that.
It's an ongoing detective story, the quest for evidence. The Nazis wanted this place secret, but a lone forest ranger saw the killings and marked the site of mass graves by hammering spent shells from the slaughter into trees. Jacek found one. How many more remained to be found? Jacek's next stop, the site of the Warsaw Ghetto. Ordinarily, you'd expect this to be fertile ground for artifacts. The largest ghetto, part of Hitler's final solution to the Jewish problem. The last stop before extermination. $450,000 were rounded up and forced inside less space than Central Park. Thousands starved or died of plaguish diseases without benefit of medicine. A death here was one saved trip to Treblinka. Ruthless efficiency. Today, little remains of the ghetto. The Nazis destroyed it in 1943. But they failed to destroy Mieczysław Jędruczuk, a local historian documenting the remaining ghetto fragments. Working with old maps and archival photos, he helped Jacek reconstruct, remodel the past. They rediscovered dwellings and lost byways, found and brought back the cobblestones on the Warsaw thoroughfare that once sliced through the ghetto, a mean street too clean for Jewish shoe leather. In Warsaw, Jacek moves through history, drawn in by all the physical reminders, small but insistent glimpses of the old ghetto wall.
The wall is a symbol of evil. Is a symbol of what, if I hope that our exhibition shows it, that the step by step all the Nazi edicts were leading to this wall, which was one of the first steps. The next step was deportation. The next step was chimneys of the crematoriums.
Urgency dogged Jacek throughout his search in Poland. Artifacts were vanishing. Recently, Polish scholars have begun using techniques perfected for classical archaeology, especially aerial photography. At the Chelmno killing site, that has been the only way to locate some of the massive bulldozed graves that once sprinkled the woods here. Archaeologists digging these pits have amassed a collection of small finds, fossils of simple lives untimely snuffed out. Half of these will be coming to Washington.
Wielu przedmiotów takich bardzo wzruszających jest na przykład taki malutki kluczyk.
For archaeologist Lucia Nowak, This is the horror. The key to a house taken away from its owners. A key to a door. To a life locked away forever. Truly, the doors of memory are kept ajar by things. Apart from the concentration camps themselves, the museum will have the largest collection of Holocaust artifacts in the world. Long before the museum building was complete, artifacts began arriving at a secret high-security warehouse in Maryland. Something as commonplace as shoes are eloquent. 4,000 shoes from a place called Majdanek.
You can tell a lot by the shoes. It's difficult to think about sometimes, but it's obvious that people didn't know they'd be traveling as far as they were, because some of the shoes have significant heels. Women obviously didn't think they'd be walking as much as they were.
In the profoundly human story of the Holocaust, things are critical. This is the forbidding face of history. And this is where historians came to chip away at it. Meetings of staff and scholars to winnow through the collection.
But we are not sure of the
But that can come off. That can come off. He can do anything to this we want.
Museum director Sheike Weinberg is the mastermind here, the driving force behind the operation, fusing analytical, historical, and narrative instincts into one staff. For him, two questions are paramount. How best to tell the story? And is it scrupulously accurate?
The shirt itself, do we know it's from Germany?
Well, it has, this is the original tag in here, so
and
we know.
And it says 1933.
1933, yep.
A refugee from Germany who fought the Nazis as part of the Jewish Brigade, Sheike Weinberg brought a solid background in theater, computers, and museums to this project.
My vision was to build a museum which, with the help of documentary material and of genuine artifacts, will put together a coherent narrative. So when you come in and you know very little or don't know anything about the Holocaust, you'll come out and have a notion. I mean, you won't know everything. I don't know everything. Nobody knows everything that happened there. But you will have the basic notion. You will know what it was all about.
Finding the right balance between storytelling and history, image and analysis, was the crux of the debate over the ship called the St. Louis. In May 1939, the St. Louis left Europe with a cargo of refugees, relieved to be headed for freedom at last. Between the time of their sailing and their arrival in Havana, however, their visas were rescinded. Rejected, the ship and its precious cargo drifted toward America, where it met a similar rebuff. A fatal rebuff, it turned out. The St. Louis had to return to Europe, while all the world wondered. Eventually, hundreds of these passengers would die in the camps.
Ralph?
Yes.
You know, I'm thinking aloud. What will happen if we tell a story? One, going on the ship. Two, pictures from the interior. Three, on the voyage. And you have pictures from people. And four, and tell the whole story to the bitter end, but make it a sequence.
There is a
That they
film, but there's a
couldn't get
video.
off
There's a
and-
video, and on the video you can go through the whole process of doing it. But in fact, the imagery that you should see is the quickest impression of the story, which is, here's a lot of people, and they couldn't get off.
I'm not against a video story, but we have 80 video stories there.
We
One
keep
of the most
saying we
powerful
don't tell the
pieces
story of
you
the
have is
bystanders,
traveling
and this is a story of the bystanders. How often do we say, where is that going to be?
Right now, there's a showcase this big.
We may.
This is the showcase. This is it.
That's all we have.
This is it. This is the showcase. Now we can go down to the floor, and we can come up a little bit to the ceiling, or we can make it bigger. But it's not big now. It never was big.
But still we need
Well, what do you
something
need
in
here? And what is the issue? The issue is they came to the edge of America and they weren't allowed off.
They came to the edge of America, and they weren't allowed off. Underneath that photo, with a stack of names and a telegram and a little diary page, and you're done, along with the monitor that has all the rest of the
Or no
getting
monitor.
on, getting off.
And this
Or
really
no
is one
monitor.
of our places where we say it wasn't all accomplished by the Nazis. I mean, that it was known, that it was knowable, that they were this close. It will be a stunning shock.
Well, what the real dilemma is,
Good guys and bad,
it's a
good guys and
dramatic,
indifference.
it's a dramatic story. We have the material. Now what you're saying is we don't have the space. Is that it?
We don't have the space.
Few today identify with the Nazis. That's not me, we say. I'd never do that. But the story of the St. Louis shows how ordinarily good people turned a blind eye on others. Historians accumulate evidence, but another phase of history is equally important: conservation, the preservation of evidence. But the job of conservation is not to restore a pristine newness, just the dull reality of the everyday.
This cap is going to be displayed from a hook this way. If we didn't put anything inside, the hook would eventually make a very deep crease here, which would eventually break the fabric. And so we are, in order to protect this, we put a padded support inside, one support in this surface, and here there is a crease that I want to preserve because it's an original crease, and we don't want things to look like they have been ironed for the purposes of display.